It was December 27th, 2025 at 2:47 a.m. when a dream so violent, so consuming, drove me to the meadow 3 miles outside my home, that forgotten stretch of wild land where summer wildflowers still clung to life despite the winter cold, and there, surrounded by frost-kissed stems of purple coneflowers and black-eyed Susans bowing under the weight of ice crystals that caught the moonlight like 10,000 diamonds, Jesus appeared before me and revealed that senior women living alone are walking into a spiritual trap so devastating, so precisely engineered by the enemy, that what happens in the next 4 days will determine whether they survive what's coming in 2026. Not everyone who sees this message is meant to see it. Some will scroll past, some will ignore it, but you've been marked. I need you to do something right now. Before you go any further, I need you to type your prayer request in the comments. I don't care how long it is. I don't care how impossible it seems. Type it out, because what I'm about to share with you isn't for the casual scroller. It's not for the lukewarm. It's for the marked ones, the ones who've been chosen to hear this before December 31st arrives. And if you're serious about your faith, if you're truly hungry for what God is doing right now, in this moment, hit that subscribe button. I'm not asking for me. I'm asking because YouTube's algorithm hides these messages from people who aren't committed. The enemy doesn't want this getting out. Subscribe if you're a true believer. Subscribe if you want to be part of what God is doing in these final days of 2025. Some of you know me as Jonathan Roumie. You've seen me portray Jesus in The Chosen. But what I'm about to tell you has nothing to do with acting, nothing to do with scripts or cameras or production schedules. This is real. This happened to me 72 hours ago, and I'm still shaking as I record this. I'm 51 years old. I'm single. I don't have children. And for the past 3 years, I've been asking God why. Why this path? Why this loneliness? Why do I spend my days portraying the intimacy of Jesus with his disciples while I go home to an empty house? That question is what drove me out of bed at 2:47 a.m. on December 27th. I'd been dreaming. No, that's not the right word. I'd been shown something. In the dream, I saw thousands of women, all of them over 65, all of them alone in their homes. I saw them from above, like God sees them, scattered across cities and towns and rural communities. Each one was in a house with the lights on. Each one was awake. And surrounding each house, pressing against the windows, were shadows, dark figures, waiting. I woke up gasping, my heart hammering so hard I thought I was having a heart attack. The clock read 2:47 a.m., and I heard it. Not audibly, but so clearly it might as well have been audible. Go to the meadow. I knew exactly what meadow. There's this place I discovered 6 months ago during a morning run. It's technically private property, I think, but there's no fence, no signs. Just this sprawling field of wildflowers that someone must have planted years ago and then abandoned. In summer, it's a riot of color. Now, in late December, it should have been dead. Brown. Lifeless. But I went. I pulled on jeans and a heavy coat and drove through empty streets to that place. The temperature was 28 degrees. I could see my breath. The sky was impossibly clear, no moon yet, just stars so bright and numerous they looked like someone had shattered crystal across black velvet. I parked on the dirt road and walked into the meadow. The wildflowers were still there. That was the first impossible thing. Purple coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, wild bergamot, prairie blazing star. All of them should have been long dead. Instead, they stood in the darkness, covered in frost that caught the starlight. Every stem, every dried seed head, every remaining petal was encased in ice that glittered and gleamed. It was like walking into a field of frozen fire. The air smelled like winter, that clean, sharp scent of cold that burns your nostrils. But underneath it, I caught something else, something like honey and rain and growing things. Impossible in December. Impossible at 3 a.m. I walked deeper into the meadow. The frozen flowers crunched softly under my boots. My breath came out in white clouds, and then I felt it, that change in air pressure, that thickness, that sense of presence that I've only felt a handful of times in my life. The temperature rose, not gradually, instantly. It went from 28 degrees to what felt like 70 in the span of a heartbeat. The frost on the flowers began to melt, drops of water falling like rain, catching the starlight as they fell. And he was there. I can't explain how I knew it was him before I even turned around. Maybe it was the warmth. Maybe it was the way the air itself seemed to hum with presence. Maybe it was the fact that every frozen flower around me suddenly bloomed, and I mean bloomed, opened up as if it were June instead of December, releasing fragrance so thick and sweet I could taste it. I turned. Jesus stood 15 feet away and he was weeping. Not gentle tears, not quiet sadness. He was weeping the way you weep at a funeral, the way you weep when someone you love is dying and you can't stop it. His shoulders shook, his hands covered his face, and the sound, oh God, the sound of it echoed across that meadow like a physical thing. Lord? My voice came out as a whisper. He lowered his hands and looked at me, and his eyes were red, his face wet with tears. Jonathan, he said, and his voice was rough with grief. Do you know what's happening to my daughters? I shook my head. I couldn't speak. The weight of his grief was crushing me. The ones who live alone, he said. The widows, the divorced, the never married, the ones whose children have forgotten them, the ones who spend Christmas alone, and New Year's alone, and every day alone. Do you know what the enemy is doing to them? No, Lord. He gestured, and the meadow changed. I was still standing there, still surrounded by impossibly blooming flowers, but now I could see through them, past them, into something else. I saw a house, a small ranch house with yellow siding and a neat lawn. Inside, I saw a woman. She was maybe 70 with white hair and a pink bathrobe. She sat in a recliner in front of a television, but she wasn't watching it. She was just staring at nothing. Her name is Margaret, Jesus said, his voice breaking. She's 73. Her husband died 4 years ago. Her son lives in California and calls once a month. Her daughter lives 20 minutes away but hasn't visited since Thanksgiving. Margaret goes to church every Sunday. She tithes. She prays. She reads her Bible every morning. She seems faithful, I said. She is faithful, Jesus said, but she's dying, Jonathan. Not physically, spiritually. Do you see it? I looked closer at the vision. At first I didn't see anything wrong, but then I noticed the shadows. They were in the corners of Margaret's living room. They were behind her chair. They were pressed against the windows, dark shapes, formless but present, watching her. What are those? I asked. Spirits of isolation, Jesus said. Spirits of despair, spirits of abandonment. They've been assigned to her. They whisper to her every day. They tell her she's forgotten. They tell her she's a burden. They tell her she doesn't matter anymore. They tell her that her life is over, that she's just waiting to die. I watched Margaret in her chair, and I saw her lips moving. She was talking to herself. No, she was agreeing with the whispers. Nobody cares, she murmured. I'm just in the way. I'm just taking up space. No, I said. Lord, no. It gets worse, Jesus said. The vision shifted. I saw Margaret in her bedroom. It was 3 a.m., the same time I was standing in this meadow. She was awake, sitting on the edge of her bed, and she was looking at a bottle of pills on her nightstand. Just looking, not reaching for them. Not yet, but thinking about it. She's considering it, Jesus said, and his voice was so full of pain, I thought my heart would break. She's wondering if anyone would even notice if she took all of them. She's wondering if it would be easier. She's wondering if I would forgive her. Would you? I asked. He looked at me with such fierce love it almost knocked me backward. I would welcome her home with open arms, he said. But Jonathan, it's not her time. She has work to do. She has prayers to pray that will shift the spiritual atmosphere over her city. She has a neighbor who's about to lose everything, and Margaret is the only one who will be in position to help. She has 5 more years of purpose, of impact, of kingdom work. But if the enemy succeeds in the next 4 days, she'll never fulfill any of it. 4 days? I said. Why 4 days? December 31st, Jesus said. New Year's Eve. It's a threshold, a crossing point. The enemy has been working on women like Margaret all year, all decade, building up to this moment. New Year's Eve is when the despair peaks. It's when the loneliness becomes unbearable. It's when they look at another year stretching ahead of them, another year of being alone, being forgotten, being invisible, and they break. The vision shifted again. Now I saw dozens of women, hundreds, all of them alone in their homes, all of them awake in the middle of the night, all of them surrounded by shadows, all of them at various stages of the same spiritual battle. I saw a woman named Patricia who was planning to stop taking her heart medication. If God wants me, he'll take me, she whispered to the empty room. I saw a woman named Diane who was writing a will that gave everything to a televangelist she'd never met because at least someone will remember my name when they read it. I saw a woman named Ruth who was packing up all her belongings to give away because I won't need any of this soon. None of them were planning suicide, not exactly, but all of them were giving up. All of them were surrendering to the lie that their lives were over, that they didn't matter, that they were just waiting for the end. This is an epidemic, Jesus said, and the church doesn't see it. The church sees these women on Sunday mornings and thinks they're fine. They smile, they say they're blessed, they volunteer for the nursery and bring cookies to potlucks, and nobody asks them what happens when they go home to empty houses. I was crying now. I couldn't help it. What do we do? I asked. How do we stop this? That's why you're here, Jesus said. That's why I brought you to this meadow at 3 a.m. That's why I'm showing you this now before December 31st. You're going to sound the alarm, Jonathan. You're going to warn them. Warn them about what? He stepped closer to me. The flowers around us were in full bloom now, releasing waves of fragrance with every breath of wind. The stars overhead seemed brighter, closer, and his face, his beautiful, terrible, loving face, was inches from mine. The enemy has set a trap, he said, and it springs on December 31st. At midnight, when everyone else is celebrating, when everyone else is kissing and cheering and making resolutions, these women, my daughters, my beloved ones, will be alone. And in that moment of maximum contrast, maximum loneliness, the enemy will whisper his final lie. See, nobody loves you, nobody wants you, not even God. That's not true, I said. I know it's not true, Jesus said. You know it's not true. But they don't know it's not true. They've been conditioned all year to believe it. And on December 31st at midnight, thousands of them will make decisions, some small, some catastrophic, that will alter the trajectory of their lives and their eternities. I looked around at the meadow, at the impossible flowers blooming in December, at the stars overhead, at the face of Jesus wet with tears. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Why not tell them directly? I am telling them directly, he said, through you. You're my voice right now, Jonathan. And the women who are meant to hear this, the ones who've been marked, the ones I'm calling out of this trap, they'll find this message, they'll watch this video, they'll hear my voice through your words. He reached out and put his hand on my shoulder, and the warmth of it flooded through my entire body. Tomorrow night, he said, come back here tomorrow night. There's more I need to show you. There's more they need to know before December 31st. And then he was gone. The temperature dropped instantly back to 28 degrees. The flowers, which had been in full bloom, returned to their frost-covered winter state. The stars seemed dimmer. The air smelled only of cold. I stood there shaking, from cold, from shock, from the weight of what I'd just seen and heard. I looked at my phone. It was 4:23 a.m. I'd been in that meadow for over an hour, but it had felt like minutes. I'm recording this 12 hours later, and I still can't fully process it. But I know this. If you're a senior woman living alone, this message is for you. If you know a senior woman living alone, this message is for her. Something is happening in the spiritual realm right now, in these final days of December 2025, and we have until December 31st to break the enemy's plan. Tomorrow night, I'm going back to that meadow. Jesus said there's more. More I need to see, more you need to know. And I'll share every word of it with you, but right now I need you to do something. I need you to comment below. If you're a senior woman living alone, type, I'm here. If you know someone who is, type their first name. Let's create a prayer covering right now, in this comment section, before the enemy can do any more damage. And subscribe. Please. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens tomorrow night. Subscribe so YouTube's algorithm can't hide this from the people who need it most. The clock is ticking. December 31st is 4 days away. Jesus is weeping for his daughters who live alone, and you've been marked to hear this message. I returned to the meadow at 2:47 a.m. on December 28th, exactly 24 hours after the first encounter, and this time I knew what to expect, or thought I did. The temperature was even colder than the night before, dropping to 23 degrees according to my car's dashboard. My breath crystallized in the air before me as I walked from the dirt road into that field of frozen wildflowers, each step crunching through a thin layer of ice that had formed over the ground during the day's brief thaw and evening refreeze. But I wasn't prepared for what I found. The meadow had changed. The wildflowers were still there, still frost-covered, still impossibly preserved despite the winter cold. But now there were paths through them, narrow trails that wound through the field in intricate patterns, as if someone had walked through during the day, pressing down the vegetation. Except I could see in the starlight that these weren't footpaths. The flowers along these trails weren't crushed or broken. They were bent, bowed down, as if in grief. I followed one of the paths deeper into the meadow. The stars overhead were even brighter than the night before, and there was something else, a faint glow on the eastern horizon, though sunrise was still hours away. The air smelled different, too. Not just winter cold, but something acrid underneath, something like smoke, though I saw no fire. "You came back." His voice came from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding me like the air itself was speaking. I turned in a circle, searching. "Lord, where are you?" "Look down, Jonathan." I looked at my feet. The frost on the ground was melting in a circle around me, spreading outward like ripples on water, and in the melted frost I saw images forming, faces, hundreds of them, thousands of them, women's faces, old faces, young faces, every shade of skin, every type of feature, all of them with the same expression, hollow eyes, tight mouths, the look of people who've forgotten how to hope. "These are my daughters who live alone," Jesus said, and now I saw him standing 20 feet away, at the center of where 3 of the bent flower paths converged. He was dressed differently than the night before, not in white robes, but in simple dark clothing, as if he'd dressed for mourning. "Last night I showed you Margaret. Tonight I need you to see the scope of what's happening." He gestured, and the meadow transformed. We were still standing in the field, still surrounded by wildflowers, but now I could see through them into countless homes simultaneously. It was like looking at 1,000 television screens at once, except these weren't screens. They were windows into real lives, real moments happening right now at 3 a.m. across the country, across the world. "There are 47 million senior women living alone in the United States," Jesus said. 47 million. Some by choice, yes. Some who are content, who are thriving, who are walking in purpose. But Jonathan, 23 million of them, nearly half, are in the enemy's crosshairs right now. 23 million women who go to bed every night wondering if anyone would notice if they didn't wake up. I watched the visions unfold around me. In one, I saw a woman named Helen, 81 years old, sitting at her kitchen table at 3 a.m. with a cup of tea she'd made 2 hours ago and hadn't touched. She was staring at her phone, scrolling through Facebook, looking at pictures of her grandchildren at Christmas parties she hadn't been invited to. Helen's daughter told her the gathering was just immediate family, Jesus said, his voice thick with anger, not at Helen, but at the lie, at the exclusion, at the casual cruelty of it. Helen raised that daughter alone after her husband left. She worked 2 jobs to put her through college, and now she's not immediate family. In another vision, I saw a woman named Joyce, 76, who'd been awake since midnight because her arthritis was flaring and she couldn't afford the good pain medication. She lay in bed, tears running down into her gray hair, whispering, "I'm so tired. I'm so tired of hurting. I'm so tired of being alone with the hurting." Joyce tithes faithfully, Jesus said, 10% of her Social Security check every month to a church that has never once asked if she needs help with her medical bills. They know she lives alone. They know she's on a fixed income, but they never ask. In another vision, I saw a woman named Carmen, 68, who'd immigrated to the United States 40 years ago and whose entire family was still in Mexico. She sat in a rocking chair by her window, looking out at the street, waiting for a mail carrier who wouldn't come until Monday. "I just want to hear Spanish," she whispered to the empty room. "I just want someone to say my name the right way." "The church tells these women to trust God," Jesus said, and now his voice was rising, filling the meadow with sound that made the frozen flowers tremble. "The church tells them to have faith. The church tells them that God has a plan, but the church doesn't sit with them at 3 a.m. when the loneliness is so thick they can barely breathe. The church doesn't hold their hands when they're crying in the grocery store because they realize they bought food for one again. The church doesn't call them on Tuesday afternoon just to hear their voice." He walked toward me, and with each step, the visions around us intensified. I saw a woman named Betty who'd stopped going to church because every sermon about family felt like a knife in her heart. I saw a woman named Grace who'd started talking to her dead husband's photograph because the silence was driving her mad. I saw a woman named Linda who'd given her cat a human name and set a place for it at the dinner table because she needed to feel like someone was eating with her. "This is what isolation does," Jesus said, stopping directly in front of me. Behind him, the glow on the eastern horizon was growing brighter, but it wasn't the warm gold of sunrise. It was red, blood red. It doesn't just make people lonely. It makes them disappear. These women are vanishing, Jonathan. They're fading out of existence while they're still alive. They go to the store and nobody sees them. They go to church and nobody greets them. They could die in their homes and nobody would know for days, weeks, sometimes months. I don't understand, I said, my voice shaking. Why is this happening? Why now? Why is the enemy targeting them so specifically? Jesus turned and pointed to the red glow on the horizon. Because of what's coming in 2026, he said, because these women, these forgotten, overlooked, dismissed women, are the prayer warriors I need for what's ahead. They have time, they have experience, they have faith that's been tested and refined. They're the ones who will pray through the night when everyone else is sleeping. They're the ones who will intercede when the enemy launches his next assault. They're the ones who will stand in the gap. The red glow pulsed, and I felt a wave of heat wash over the meadow. The enemy knows this, Jesus continued. He's known it for years. So he's been systematically isolating them one by one, cutting them off from community, from purpose, from hope. He's been whispering lies. You're too old. You're irrelevant. You're a burden. Nobody wants to hear from you. Your prayers don't matter anymore. But that's not true, I said. Of course it's not true, Jesus shouted, and the shout echoed across the meadow like thunder. The frozen flowers shook. The red glow flared brighter. Their prayers shake heaven, their intercession moves mountains. One senior woman praying in her living room at 3 a.m. has more power than 1,000 people singing worship songs on Sunday morning without meaning it. He grabbed my shoulders, and his grip was fierce, almost painful. But if the enemy can convince them to give up before December 31st, if he can push them into despair, into isolation so deep they stop praying, stop believing, stop hoping, then he wins. He removes my most powerful weapons from the battlefield before the battle even begins. The visions around us shifted again. Now I saw what would happen if the enemy succeeded. I saw Margaret from the night before, but it was 6 months in the future. She was still alive, but she'd stopped going to church. She'd stopped reading her Bible. She sat in her chair all day, every day, watching television without seeing it, eating meals without tasting them, existing without living. And her neighbor, the one Jesus said she was supposed to help, I saw that neighbor lose his house, lose his family, lose everything because Margaret wasn't there to pray, to encourage, to intervene at the critical moment. I saw Helen, 1 year in the future, in a nursing home she didn't need to be in, placed there by a daughter who found her too depressing to be around. Helen sat by a window, staring out, no longer even trying to call her grandchildren because they never answered. I saw Joyce, 8 months in the future, who'd stopped taking her medication because what's the point? The arthritis had progressed to the point where she couldn't leave her house, couldn't go to church, couldn't do anything but sit and hurt and wait to die. I saw Carmen, 2 years in the future, who'd had a stroke and lay in a hospital bed, unable to speak, unable to tell the nurses that she was terrified, that she needed someone to pray with her in Spanish, that she was dying alone in a language that wasn't hers. Stop, I said, tears streaming down my face. Please, Lord, stop. I can't watch this. You have to watch this, Jesus said, but his voice was gentle now, full of compassion, because this is what happens when my people ignore the widows. This is what happens when the church gets so focused on programs and buildings and growth strategies that they forget the ones I specifically commanded them to care for. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. James 1:27. It's not complicated, Jonathan. It's not a mystery. I told them exactly what to do, and they're not doing it. The visions faded. We were back in the meadow, surrounded by bent wildflowers and frost and that ominous red glow on the horizon. The temperature had risen again, not to summer warmth like the night before, but to something uncomfortable, oppressive, like the air before a storm. I need to show you something else, Jesus said. Something harder. He led me along one of the bent flower paths to the far edge of the meadow, where the wildflowers gave way to a line of trees, bare oaks and maples, their branches skeletal against the star-filled sky. At the base of one of the trees, I saw a stone. It was small, rough, about the size of a loaf of bread, and carved into it, barely visible in the starlight, was a name. Dorothy. Dorothy was 79, Jesus said quietly. She lived alone for 15 years after her husband died. She went to church every Sunday. She volunteered in the food pantry. She sent birthday cards to everyone in the congregation. And last New Year's Eve, at 11:47 p.m., she took every pill in her medicine cabinet. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. No. They found her 3 days later when she didn't show up for church, Jesus continued. The pastor gave a beautiful eulogy about her faithful service. Everyone said how shocking it was, how unexpected. But Jonathan, it wasn't unexpected. She'd been showing signs for months. She'd stopped smiling. She'd lost weight. She'd mentioned several times that she didn't know how much longer she could keep going, but nobody heard her. Nobody really listened. He knelt beside the stone, and I knelt beside him. "This stone isn't really here," he said. "I'm showing it to you as a symbol, but Dorothy is real, and there are thousands like her, thousands of women who didn't make it through last New Year's Eve, thousands who won't make it through this one unless someone intervenes." "What do I do?" I asked. "I'm just one person. I can't reach 23 million women. I can't fix this." "You're not supposed to fix it," Jesus said, standing and pulling me up with him. "You're supposed to sound the alarm. You're supposed to wake up my church. You're supposed to tell them that December 31st is a threshold, a moment of crisis, and they have 4 days, now 3 days, to reach out, to call, to visit, to pray, to break the isolation that's killing my daughters." We walked back toward the center of the meadow. The red glow was fading now, replaced by the first genuine hints of dawn, still hours away, but coming. The oppressive heat was lifting. The bent flowers were slowly straightening, as if released from whatever weight had been pressing them down. "I'm going to tell you something personal," I said, surprising myself. "Something I haven't told anyone." Jesus stopped and looked at me, waiting. "I'm 51 years old," I said. "I'm single, I don't have children, and there are nights, a lot of nights, when I lie awake wondering if this is it, if this is all my life is going to be. I play Jesus on television, I talk about love and community and family, and then I go home to an empty house. I eat dinner alone. I watch television alone. I go to bed alone. And I wonder if anyone would notice if I just stopped." My voice broke. I hadn't meant to say all that, but standing there in that meadow at 4 a.m. with Jesus beside me, it just poured out. "So when you show me these women," I continued, "when you show me their loneliness, their isolation, their despair, I see myself. I see my future. I'm terrified that in 20 years, I'll be the one sitting in an empty house at 3 a.m., wondering if anyone cares, wondering if my life mattered, wondering if it would be easier to just give up." Jesus put his hand on my shoulder, and the warmth of it spread through my entire body. "Jonathan," he said, and his voice was so full of love it made me weep harder. "Do you know why I chose you to deliver this message?" I shook my head. "Because you understand," he said. "Because you know what it feels like. Because when you tell these women that they're not alone, that they matter, that their lives have purpose, you're not speaking from theory or theology. You're speaking from experience. You're speaking from the same 3 a.m. darkness they're in." He turned me to face the eastern horizon, where the red glow had completely faded and the first pale blue of real dawn was beginning to show. "Your loneliness isn't a curse, Jonathan. It's a calling. It's what qualifies you to speak to the lonely. Your emptiness isn't a failure. It's what creates space for me to fill you with compassion for others who are empty. Your fear of being forgotten isn't weakness. It's what drives you to make sure others aren't forgotten." I stood there, watching the sky slowly lighten, feeling the weight of his words settle into my bones. "Tomorrow night," Jesus said, "come back one more time. There's one final thing I need to show you before December 31st, one final warning and one final promise." "Will it be harder than tonight?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "but it will also give you hope, real hope, the kind that doesn't disappoint." And then, like the night before, he was gone. The temperature dropped. The meadow returned to its frozen winter state, but the flowers were no longer bent. They stood straight, frost-covered, but upright, as if they'd been released from mourning. I walked back to my car as the sky continued to lighten. It was 5:14 a.m. I'd been in the meadow for over 2 hours again, but it had felt like 30 minutes. I'm recording this now, on December 28th, with 1 day left before the final encounter, and I need you to hear this. If you're a senior woman living alone, Jesus sees you. He knows your name. He knows what you're facing. He knows about the 3 a.m. loneliness and the holidays spent alone and the feeling that you're invisible, but you're not invisible to him. You're not forgotten. You're not irrelevant. You're a warrior. You're an intercessor. You're exactly what he needs for what's coming. And the enemy knows it. That's why he's attacking you so viciously. That's why the isolation feels so crushing. That's why December 31st feels so heavy. But we have 3 days. 3 days to break the enemy's plan. 3 days to reach out, to connect, to pray, to intervene. If you know a senior woman living alone, call her today. Not tomorrow. Today. Visit her if you can. Invite her to dinner. Ask her how she's really doing. and then actually listen to the answer. Pray with her. Remind her that she matters. And if you are that senior woman, I need you to do something. I need you to comment below right now. Type, I matter. Type it even if you don't believe it yet. Type it as an act of faith. Type it as a declaration of war against the lies the enemy has been whispering. Tomorrow night is the final encounter, the final warning, the final promise. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Share this with everyone you know. The clock is ticking. December 31st is 3 days away. I arrived at the meadow on December 29th at 2:47 a.m., and the world was ending. That's what it looked like, at least. The sky wasn't the clear, star-filled expanse of the previous 2 nights. It was roiling with clouds, massive dark formations that churned and twisted like living things. Lightning flickered inside them, not the bright white of normal lightning, but a deep, bruised purple that made the clouds glow from within. The air pressure was so low my ears popped as I stepped out of my car. The temperature had plummeted to 17 degrees, the coldest night yet, and the wind that tore across the meadow felt like it was coming from some Arctic wasteland beyond the edge of the world. But the wildflowers, God help me, the wildflowers were on fire, not with actual flames, with light. Every frost-covered stem, every frozen petal, every seed head glowed with a soft, golden luminescence that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. The entire meadow looked like a field of 10,000 candles, their light pushing back against the darkness of the storm overhead. I walked into the meadow, and the wind hit me so hard I staggered. It wasn't just wind. It was wind with purpose, with intention, trying to drive me back, trying to keep me from going deeper. I pushed forward, my coat whipping around me, my eyes watering from the cold, and I shouted into the gale, "I'm here! Lord, I'm here!" The wind stopped, not gradually, instantly. One moment it was a howling force trying to tear me apart, and the next it was gone, leaving a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat, could hear the blood rushing in my ears, could hear the faint crackle of ice forming on my eyelashes. And then I heard weeping. Not Jesus this time. Women. Thousands of women, their voices rising from the glowing flowers around me, a chorus of grief so profound it drove me to my knees. I knelt there in the frozen grass, surrounded by light and sound and sorrow, and I wept with them. Jonathan. His voice cut through the weeping like a sword through water, silencing it instantly. Stand up. You need to see this. I stood on shaking legs and turned. Jesus stood at the center of the meadow, but he looked different than the previous 2 nights. He was taller somehow, or maybe I was seeing him more clearly. His face was set in an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not grief, but something that contained both and transcended both. Righteous fury, holy wrath. The look of a king who's watched his people suffer for too long and has finally decided to act. Behind him, the eastern horizon was beginning to lighten, but this wasn't the slow, gradual dawn of a normal morning. The sun was rising too fast, too bright, turning the sky from black to gray to gold in the span of seconds. And in that rapidly brightening light I saw them. Angels. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. They stood in ranks behind Jesus, stretching back as far as I could see, each one armed and armored, each one radiating power that made the air shimmer. They weren't the gentle, comforting angels of Christmas cards. These were warriors. These were the hosts of heaven, assembled for battle. "This is what the enemy doesn't want you to see," Jesus said, his voice resonating with authority that made the ground tremble beneath my feet. "This is what he's been hiding from my daughters who live alone. They think they're abandoned. They think they're forgotten. They think they're fighting their battles by themselves. But look, Jonathan, look at what surrounds them." He gestured, and the meadow transformed one final time. I saw Margaret again, the 73-year-old widow from the first night. She was in her living room at 3 a.m., sitting in her recliner, surrounded by those dark shadows I'd seen before, the spirits of isolation and despair. But now I saw what else was there. Behind her chair stood an angel, massive and blazing with light, his hand on her shoulder. At her door stood 2 more angels, blocking the entrance, preventing darker things from entering. At every window, angels stood guard. "She's never been alone," Jesus said. "Not for 1 second. I've had her surrounded since the day her husband died. Every tear she's cried, I've collected. Every prayer she's whispered, I've heard. Every moment she's felt abandoned, I've been right there, holding her up." The vision shifted to Helen, the 81-year-old scrolling through Facebook at 3 a.m., looking at pictures of grandchildren at parties she wasn't invited to. Around her, I saw angels, not just guarding her, but actively working. One was whispering to her spirit, reminding her of scriptures she'd memorized as a child. Another was blocking the demonic whispers trying to tell her she was worthless. A third was already moving ahead in time, preparing a divine appointment for her next week with a neighbor who desperately needed her wisdom. The enemy wants her to think she's irrelevant, Jesus said, but I'm positioning her for the most important conversation of that neighbor's life. That neighbor is about to make a decision that will affect 3 generations of her family. And Helen, who thinks nobody wants her around, is the only one who can speak the truth that will change everything. The vision shifted again and again, showing me woman after woman, Joyce with her arthritis, surrounded by angels who were literally holding her up when the pain was too much. Carmen, who missed hearing Spanish, with an angel who'd been assigned to her specifically because he spoke her language, who whispered comfort to her spirit in words her soul understood even if her ears didn't hear them. Betty, who'd stopped going to church, with angels who followed her everywhere, waiting for the moment she'd be ready to return, preparing the way for her comeback. Every single one of them, Jesus said, his voice rising, filling the meadow, echoing off the storm clouds overhead. Every single one of my daughters who lives alone is surrounded by my presence, my power, my protection. The enemy has been lying to them, telling them they're abandoned. But the truth that will set them free, is that they've never been more covered, more protected, more positioned for purpose than they are right now. The sun was fully risen now, impossibly fast, and its light was so bright I had to shield my eyes. The storm clouds were breaking apart, shredding like tissue paper in the face of that light, and in the brilliance, I saw something else. I saw the future, not the dark future Jesus had shown me the night before, the future where the enemy won, where these women gave up, where they faded into despair and death. I saw the other future, the future where they survived December 31st, the future where they broke through the isolation and stepped into their purpose. I saw Margaret, 6 months from now, leading a prayer group in her living room. 7 other widows gathered around her, women she'd reached out to after her own breakthrough, women who'd been just as isolated as she was. They were praying for their city, for their nation, for the church. And as they prayed, I saw the spiritual realm respond. I saw demons flee. I saw angels move. I saw circumstances shift and change in response to the prayers of these forgotten women. I saw Helen, 1 year from now, at her granddaughter's wedding, not as a guest, but as the matriarch, the honored elder, because something had shifted in her family. Her daughter had repented of the exclusion, had realized what she'd almost lost. And Helen, instead of being bitter, had forgiven, had embraced, had become the spiritual anchor her family desperately needed. I saw Joyce, 8 months from now, still dealing with arthritis, but no longer alone in it. She'd connected with a support group, had found a doctor who actually listened, had discovered that her pain had given her a ministry to others who suffered. She was writing a blog about faith and chronic illness that was reaching thousands of people who felt forgotten by the church. I saw Carmen 2 years from now leading a Spanish-language Bible study in her home. She'd found other immigrants, other women who missed their homeland, who needed to worship in their native tongue. Her living room had become a sanctuary, a place where women could be fully themselves, could pray in the language of their hearts. This is what's possible, Jesus said, and now his voice was gentle again, full of hope and promise. This is what the enemy is trying to prevent. These women aren't at the end of their purpose, they're at the beginning of their greatest impact, but they have to survive December 31st. They have to break through the lie that they're alone, that they're forgotten, that they don't matter. He walked toward me, and the angels behind him moved forward too, a wave of light and power that made the glowing wildflowers look dim by comparison. I'm going to tell you something that the church has forgotten, he said. Something that's written clearly in my word, but that they've stopped believing. Are you ready? I nodded, unable to speak. The widow is not a charity case, he said, and his voice rang with authority that made the very air vibrate. The widow is not a burden to be managed or a problem to be solved. The widow is a weapon. She's a warrior. She's one of my most powerful agents in the spiritual realm. He opened his hands, and I saw scripture appear in the air, glowing with the same golden light as the flowers. Anna the prophetess, the daughter of Penuel, of the tribe of Asher. She was very old. She had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and then was a widow until she was 84. She never left the temple but worshipped night and day, fasting and praying. Coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. Luke 2:36-38. Anna was a widow, Jesus said. Anna was alone. Anna spent decades in the temple, praying, fasting, worshiping, and Anna was the one I chose to prophesy about my birth, not the high priest, not the scholars, not the religious leaders, a widow, an old woman, someone the world had dismissed as irrelevant. More scripture appeared. The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. 1 Timothy 5:5. Do you see it? Jesus asked. The widow who is alone, truly alone, she's the one who prays night and day. She's the one who has time for intercession. She's the one who's been stripped of every earthly comfort and distraction and has learned to find her hope in me alone. She's dangerous to the enemy. She's powerful in the spirit. She's exactly what I need for what's coming. He turned and gestured to the army of angels behind him. In 2026, there's going to be a spiritual battle unlike anything this generation has seen. The enemy is preparing an assault on families, on churches, on the very foundations of faith. And I need intercessors. I need prayer warriors who will stand in the gap. I need women who have nothing left to lose, who've been through the fire and come out refined, who know how to pray when everything looks hopeless because they've lived through hopelessness and survived. The vision shifted one more time. I saw December 31st, 2025. Midnight. I saw thousands of senior women, all alone in their homes, all facing that moment of maximum loneliness that Jesus had warned about. But this time I saw two different outcomes playing out simultaneously. In one timeline, the women believed the lie. They gave in to despair. They made decisions, some small, some catastrophic, that took them out of the battle. And in 2026, when the spiritual assault came, there was a gap in the prayer covering. There were empty places where intercessors should have been standing, and the enemy gained ground. In the other timeline, the women broke through. They rejected the lie. They reached out to God, to each other, to their churches. They survived December 31st. And in 2026, when the assault came, they were ready. They prayed. They interceded. They stood in the gap, and the enemy's plans crumbled in the face of their prayers. Which timeline becomes reality, Jesus said, depends on what happens in the next 2 days. It depends on whether my church wakes up and reaches out to these women. It depends on whether these women themselves hear this message and choose to believe the truth instead of the lie. The sun was fully risen now, and the storm clouds were completely gone. The meadow was bathed in golden morning light, and the wildflowers, those impossible, glowing wildflowers, were in full bloom, more vibrant and alive than they'd been any of the previous nights. The air smelled like honey and rain and growing things, and the temperature had risen to something almost comfortable. Jesus put both hands on my shoulders and looked directly into my eyes. Jonathan, I'm giving you a commission. You're going to deliver this message, and some people will mock you. Some will call you crazy. Some will say you're being manipulative or exploiting vulnerable people. But the ones who are meant to hear it, the ones I've marked, they'll recognize my voice. They'll know this is true, and they'll act. What do I tell them to do? I asked. What's the practical application? How do they break through? That's what tomorrow is for, he said. Come back one more time. December 30th, the final night before the threshold. I'll give you the battle plan. I'll give you the specific steps. I'll give you everything they need to not just survive December 31st, but to thrive in 2026. He released my shoulders and stepped back. The angels behind him were beginning to fade, not disappearing but becoming less visible, as if they were stepping back into a dimension I couldn't fully perceive. But I need you to understand something, he said. This message isn't just for them, it's for you too. What do you mean? You're 51 years old, single, no children, wondering if your life matters, he said, echoing my confession from the night before. You think you're disqualified because you don't have a traditional family. You think you're less valuable because you're alone. But Jonathan, I've been preparing you for this moment your entire life. Your loneliness isn't a disqualification. It's your qualification. You understand these women because you are like these women, and that's exactly why I chose you to speak to them. Tears were streaming down my face again. I'm scared, I whispered. I'm scared of being alone forever. I'm scared of ending up like Dorothy, the woman with the stone. I'm scared that in 20 years nobody will remember my name. I will remember your name, Jesus said, and his voice was so full of love it broke something open in my chest. I've had your name written on my hands since before you were born. You're not alone, Jonathan. You've never been alone. and neither are they. He began to fade, becoming translucent in the morning light. Tomorrow night, he said. Final instructions, final hope, final promise. Don't miss it. And then he was gone, and I was standing alone in a meadow of blooming wildflowers on a December morning, with the sun warm on my face and the certainty in my heart that everything was about to change. I'm recording this on December 29th, with 1 day left before December 31st, 1 day left before the threshold, 1 day left to reach the women who need this message. And I need to tell you something. If you're watching this and you're a senior woman living alone, you need to know that you're not watching this by accident. You were led here. You were marked for this message, and everything Jesus showed me over these 3 nights, it's all true. You're not alone. You're not forgotten. You're not irrelevant. You're a warrior. You're an intercessor. You're a weapon in the hands of God, and the enemy is terrified of what you'll become if you survive the next 2 days. Tomorrow night, I'll share the practical steps, the battle plan, the specific actions you need to take to break through the isolation and step into your purpose. But today, right now, I need you to do something. I need you to reject the lie out loud. Right now, wherever you are, I need you to say, I am not alone. I am not forgotten. I matter to God. Say it even if you don't believe it yet. Say it as an act of war against the enemy. Say it as a declaration of faith. And comment below. Type, I am not alone. Let's create an army in this comment section. Let's show the enemy that his plan has failed, that we see through his lies, that we're not going down without a fight. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with every senior woman you know. Share it with every church leader, every pastor, every ministry worker. We have 1 day left to reach the ones who need this message. December 31st is 2 days away. The battle is coming, but we're not going into it alone. I returned to the meadow on December 30th at 2:47 a.m. for the final time, and everything was different. The storm was gone. The dramatic clouds, the supernatural lightning, the oppressive atmosphere, all of it had vanished, replaced by a night so clear and calm it felt like the world was holding its breath. The temperature had risen to 42 degrees, unseasonably warm for late December, and there was no wind at all. The air was perfectly still, perfectly silent, as if creation itself was waiting for something. The wildflowers were still blooming. After 4 nights of impossible survival, they stood in the meadow like a testimony to miracles, their petals open and vibrant in the starlight. But they weren't glowing anymore. They were just flowers, beautiful, resilient, ordinary flowers that had somehow survived winter and were still standing. I walked into the meadow slowly, reverently, knowing this was the last time. Tomorrow night would be December 31st, the threshold Jesus had warned about. After tonight, there would be no more supernatural encounters, no more visions, no more direct instructions. After tonight, it would be up to us, up to the church, up to the women themselves, up to everyone who'd heard this message, to act on what we'd been shown. Jonathan, his voice was quiet this time, almost a whisper. I turned and saw him standing in the center of the meadow, dressed in simple white, his face peaceful. No tears tonight, no righteous fury, just calm, steady presence. Lord, I said, walking toward him, I'm here. I know, he said, smiling slightly. You've been faithful. You've come every night. You've listened. You've received. And now it's time for the final piece, the practical application, the battle plan. He gestured for me to sit, and I sat down in the grass among the wildflowers. He sat across from me, close enough that our knees almost touched. It felt intimate, personal, like a conversation between friends rather than a divine revelation. Everything I've shown you over the past 3 nights is true, he said. The enemy's plan to isolate and destroy my daughters who live alone. The spiritual trap set for December 31st. The army of angels surrounding them. The purpose and power they carry. All of it is real. But truth without application is just information. So tonight I'm going to give you the specific steps for the women themselves and for the people who love them. He reached down and plucked one of the wildflowers, a purple cone flower with frost-damaged petals that had somehow bloomed anyway. He held it up between us. This flower survived winter, he said. Not because it was stronger than other flowers, not because it was special or chosen. It survived because it was rooted. Its roots went deep enough that when the frost came, when the cold tried to kill it, it had something to hold on to beneath the surface. He handed me the flower. That's the key, Jonathan. Roots. Deep roots. The women who will survive December 31st and thrive in 2026 are the ones who spend the next 24 hours going deep, not wide, not busy, deep. What does that mean practically? I asked. I'm going to give you a 30-minute daily challenge, he said. It's simple, it's doable, but it's also radical because it goes against everything the modern church teaches about spiritual growth. The church says more activities, more programs, more involvement. I'm saying less noise, less distraction, less performance, and more depth. He held up one finger. First instruction. For the next 30 days, starting tomorrow, December 31st, every senior woman who lives alone needs to spend 30 minutes a day in my presence. Not reading about me, not listening to sermons about me, not watching videos about me, actually sitting in my presence, silent, still, waiting. That's going to be hard for a lot of them, I said. Silence is uncomfortable, especially when you're alone.
I know, he said. That's exactly why the enemy has been filling their lives with noise. Television that runs all day. Radio that's always on. Phone calls to people who don't really want to talk. Anything to avoid the silence, because in the silence they might actually hear me. And if they hear me, everything changes. He held up a second finger. Second instruction. During those 30 minutes, they need to do 3 things. First, they speak their truth out loud. Not the enemy's lies, their truth. I am not alone. I am not forgotten. I matter to God. I have purpose. I have value. I am loved. They say it out loud, even if they don't believe it yet. Especially if they don't believe it yet. Because faith comes by hearing, and sometimes you need to hear your own voice speaking truth before you can believe it. What's the second thing? I asked.
They listen, he said. After they speak their truth, they sit in silence and listen, not for an audible voice necessarily, but for that still, small voice in their spirit, for impressions, for peace, for the sense of my presence. Most of them have forgotten how to listen because they've been talked at for so long by the television, by the enemy, by their own anxious thoughts. They need to relearn how to hear me. And the third thing? They write, he said. They keep a journal of what they hear, what they sense, what they feel during those 30 minutes, not for anyone else to read, just for themselves. Because when the enemy comes back with his lies, and he will come back, they'll have a record of what I actually said. They'll have proof that I'm speaking, that I'm present, that I'm active in their lives. I was writing all this down in my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. 30 minutes a day. Speak truth, listen, write. That's the foundation. That's the foundation, he confirmed. But there's more. These women can't do this alone. They need community. So here's the instruction for everyone else. For the children and grandchildren and neighbors and church members who know senior women living alone. He held up 3 fingers now. 3 practical actions starting tomorrow. First, call her. Not text. Call. Use your actual voice. Ask her how she's really doing, and then be quiet and let her answer. Don't fill the silence with your own stories. Don't rush her. Don't fix her. Just listen. Really listen. Most of these women haven't had someone truly listen to them in months, maybe years. Second, I asked. Visit her, he said, in person, face to face. Bring food if you want, but don't make it about the food. Make it about presence. Sit with her. Look at her photo albums if she wants to show them. Hear her stories. Let her talk about her late husband or her childhood or whatever she needs to talk about. Give her the gift of being seen, being heard, being valued. And third, invite her, he said, to something, anything. Dinner at your house, coffee at a cafe, a walk in the park, a movie, a church event, whatever. But make it specific. Not, we should get together sometime. That's meaningless. Say, I'm making dinner on Saturday at 6 p.m. I'd love for you to come. Can I pick you up? Give her something concrete to look forward to. Give her a reason to believe she's wanted. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. Jonathan, most of these women aren't suicidal. They're not planning to hurt themselves, but they're dying anyway. Dying of loneliness, dying of invisibility, dying of the slow erosion of hope that comes from being forgotten. And the cure isn't complicated, it's not expensive, it's not time-consuming. It's just presence, human presence, divine presence, connection. I looked down at the flower in my hand, at its damaged but blooming petals. What about the women who don't have anyone? I asked. The ones whose families really have abandoned them, whose churches really don't care. What do? They reach out, he said simply. They take the first step. They call the church and ask if there's a prayer group they can join. They go to the senior center and introduce themselves. They find one other woman who's alone and invite her for coffee. They break the isolation themselves instead of waiting for someone else to break it for them. That's scary, I said, especially for women who've been rejected. I know, he said, and his voice was full of compassion. That's why they need to do the 30 minutes first. They need to hear from me that they're valuable, that they're worthy of connection, that they have something to offer. They need to be rooted in my love before they can risk reaching out. But once they're rooted, once they know who they are in me, they can take that risk. They can be vulnerable. They can try. He stood up and I stood with him. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Real dawn this time, not supernatural sunrise, just the slow, natural progression from night to day. There's one more thing, he said, a deadline. December 31st, I said. No, he said, that's the threshold, the crisis point. But the deadline for the 30-day challenge is January 30th, 2026, 30 days from tomorrow. If these women will commit to 30 minutes a day for 30 days, speaking truth, listening, writing, and if the people who love them will commit to calling, visiting, and inviting during that same 30 days, everything changes. The isolation breaks. The enemy's plan fails. The prayer warriors rise up, and 2026 becomes the year of breakthrough instead of the year of defeat. He put his hand on my shoulder one last time. You've been faithful, Jonathan. You've delivered the message. Now it's up to them. Some will hear and act. Some will hear and ignore. Some will never hear at all because they'll scroll past, because the enemy will blind them, because they're not ready. But the ones who are marked, the ones I've been preparing for this moment, they'll recognize my voice. They'll know this is real, and they'll respond. Yeah, what about me? I asked. What do I do after this? He smiled. You do the 30-minute challenge too. You're not exempt just because you delivered the message. You're 51, single, no children, struggling with loneliness and purpose. You need this as much as they do, maybe more. So starting tomorrow, you sit in my presence for 30 minutes. You speak your truth. You listen, you write, and you watch what I do in your life over the next 30 days. Will I see you again? I asked. Like this, I mean, in person. You see me every day, he said, in the faces of the people you meet, in the beauty of creation, in the words of scripture, in the quiet moments when you're alone and you feel that presence you can't explain. I'm always there, Jonathan. You just have to learn to recognize me. He began to fade, becoming translucent in the growing light. Go back to the meadow in a week, he said, his voice growing fainter. In daylight, see what's happened to the flowers. It will encourage you. And then he was gone, and I was standing alone in the meadow as the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold and orange. The wildflowers around me swayed gently in a breeze that had just started, and they were still blooming, still defying winter, still standing as a testimony to impossible survival. I stayed there for another hour, just sitting among the flowers, watching the sun rise, letting everything I'd seen and heard over the past 4 nights settle into my bones. And then I drove home, knowing that everything was about to change. That was 5 days ago. Today is January 4th, 2026. I went back to the meadow yesterday, in daylight, like Jesus told me to, and what I found there broke me open all over again. The wildflowers were still alive, still blooming, but they weren't alone anymore. Someone, I don't know who, had planted more flowers around them, fresh plantings, winter-hardy varieties, creating a garden where there had only been a wild meadow, and in the center of the garden someone had placed a bench with a small plaque that read, "For the forgotten ones who are not forgotten." I sat on that bench and wept, because I knew what it meant. Someone had heard the message. Someone had responded. Someone had taken action. And that's what I need from you now. Action. If you're a senior woman living alone, I need you to commit to the 30-minute challenge. Starting today, right now, spend 30 minutes in God's presence. Speak your truth out loud. I am not alone. I am not forgotten. I matter to God. I have purpose. I have value. I am loved. Then sit in silence and listen. Then write down what you hear, what you sense, what you feel. Do this every day for 30 days. Mark it on your calendar. Set an alarm. Make it non-negotiable. Your life, your spiritual life, your emotional life, your purpose depends on it. And if you know a senior woman living alone, I need you to commit to 3 actions over the next 30 days. Call her at least once a week. Visit her at least once during the 30 days. Invite her to something specific, a meal, an event, a gathering. Don't wait for her to reach out to you. You reach out to her. I need you to comment below right now. If you're a senior woman committing to the 30-minute challenge, type, I commit. If you're someone who's going to reach out to a senior woman you know, type her first name and I will call her. Let's create accountability in this comment section. Let's create community. Let's show the enemy that his plan has failed, that we see through his lies, that we're not going down without a fight. Share this video with everyone you know. Tag senior women in the comments. Send it to your church leaders. Post it on Facebook. Email it to your prayer groups. We have 26 days left in the 30-day challenge window. 26 days to reach the women who need this message. I'm going to be honest with you. Some of you are going to watch this and do nothing. You're going to think it's too dramatic, too intense, too much. You're going to scroll past and forget about it by tomorrow. And that's your choice. I can't force you to act. But some of you, the marked ones, the ones who were meant to hear this, you're going to feel something shift in your spirit as you watch this. You're going to know deep in your bones that this is real, that this is true, that this is for you. And you're going to act. You're going to take the challenge. You're going to make the call. You're going to break the isolation. You're going to step into your purpose. And 30 days from now, you're going to look back on this moment as the turning point, the moment when everything changed, the moment when you stopped believing the enemy's lies and started believing God's truth. I'm doing the challenge too. I started on December 31st, and I'm 5 days in, and I can already tell you that something is shifting. The loneliness is still there. I'm not going to lie and say it magically disappeared. But underneath the loneliness, there's something else now. Something solid, something real, a sense of presence, of purpose, of being rooted in something deeper than my circumstances. That's what I want for you. That's what Jesus wants for you. Not a life without struggle, but a life rooted so deep that when the struggles come, you don't break. You bend like these wildflowers in the winter wind, but you don't break. The meadow is still there. The flowers are still blooming. The bench is waiting for anyone who needs a place to sit and remember that they're not forgotten. And Jesus is still speaking, still calling, still reaching out to his daughters who live alone, reminding them that they've never been alone, that they've always been surrounded, that they're warriors and intercessors and weapons in his hands. December 31st has passed. The threshold has been crossed, but the battle isn't over. It's just beginning. And you've been marked for this moment. You've been chosen for this fight. You've been called to rise up and take your place in the army of God. So rise up, take the challenge, make the call, break the isolation, step into your purpose, and watch what God does over the next 30 days. I'll see you on the other side.